The Athletic published what it is calling an unscientific study, but I think is very good. Look at who the most popular team in college football is and what we can glean from that. Let's talk a little bit about the criteria. Let's talk a little bit about the rankings and why it is Michigan, Ohio State, Bama. What's up, kinfolk? It's RJ Young. I am not on a step mill. If this is your first time watching the #1 college football show, welcome. Thank you for joining us here. We talk college football year round. If that's something you're into, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and tell me, what do you think about the rankings as you see them at The Athletic or as I'm about to talk to them? It is a very cool study that they performed, and I think it is worth your time if you can give it some. But I wanted to really talk about this at the top and talk about the criteria here. Michigan edging Ohio State in these rankings, given on a points value system, by 10 points. And 10's getting a lot, right? So 0 out of 10, right? So what did they use in their unscientific study, as they put it, unscientific methodology, They used television ratings, how many people watch it, StubHub, tickets, ticket prices, ticket demand, Google, like Google Trends, social, speaks for itself, attention. Yeah, all right. It's kind of a moving target. We could talk about that one a little bit more. Merchandise, revenue, like television revenue. Bet MGM, because they get data to see how many people were betting on what team. USC at the top of the most bet on team in 2024. And then alumni, right? How big's your alumni base? A couple of really interesting things that I learned from this study. But let's start with Ohio State behind Michigan. Not something that I exactly expected. Ohio State, given some other studies, one particularly at Samford down in Alabama, where they do this kind of analytics annually, found that Ohio State is one of those teams. Penn State is also one of those teams. Penn State ranks at number 6 here. Those Big Ten teams, those 3 Big Ten teams at the top, Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State, have always been historically very well followed. And there's reasons that I can give you to that we're going to give to you. Let's talk about the rest of the ranking. So Michigan at 1, Ohio State at 2, Alabama at 3, Georgia at 4, Texas at 5, Penn State at 6, Tennessee at 7, Notre Dame at 8, and then we have basically 9, tied for 9 here. LSU, Texas A&M, Florida, Oklahoma. A&M got 12 points, edging Florida by 10.5. Oklahoma got 10. Ranking 10th, right? So not a tie, but those are the 10 teams. Once again, Michigan, Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, Texas, Penn State, Tennessee, Notre Dame, LSU, Texas A&M, Florida, Oklahoma. So these are all teams that we have all watched and have all made some sort of dent on our college football fandom and our personalities, right? Going back basically the last 30 years, 20 years. 2003-ish. And the reason I'm going to stamp that at 2003 is because LSU wasn't really a team that we talked about like that until Nick Saban got there and turned them into a national champion in 2003. Peyton Manning in Tennessee, Team Martin, Tennessee. LSU, 3 national championships the last two decades. Notre Dame played for the national championship twice in the last 15 years. Florida, Tim Tebow, Urban Meyer, that 08 Florida team that was so good. Oklahoma, basically a winning team up until Brent Venables arrives for 20 plus years, right? 3 Heisman winners just since 2008, right? So we're talking about Sam Bradford. We're talking about Kyler Murray. We're talking about Baker Mayfield. We get to Jason White. We can keep going there. Adrian Peterson may be the best player to not win the Heisman Trophy ever. Ohio State won the national championship just this past year. Michigan won the national championship the year before that. Georgia won 2 in a row after a 40-year drought. Texas won the 2005 national championship, beat a vaunted USC team, Mac Brown, Vince Young. Notre Dame, we talked about. A&M, that's the one for me. That one. A&M has not won a conference title, let alone a national title, since 1998. A&M's got 1 national championship, and that's before World War II in 1939. Florida, I talked about. Oklahoma, we talked about. So A&M here for me is the outlier. I'm like, yo, dog, the folks in College Station really, really, really love that program. And you see that, right? You know people that are A&M fans, and they are very proud to be A&M fans. I'm also interested in this alumni bit because this part was really kind of staggering to me. Estimated living alumni by The Athletic. 790,000 plus at Indiana, topping Penn State, Michigan, UCLA, A&M, Ohio State, Illinois, Arizona State, Rutgers, and Purdue. That's wild. But also think about what Kirk Cignetti was able to do when he was getting everybody pulling in the same direction. They make the playoff, and not only did they make the playoff, they set a school record for wins, and their only losses are for the two teams that played in the national championship game in Notre Dame and Ohio State, who are both on this list. Perhaps Indiana has always just been a sleeping giant for football, because we know what men's basketball means there, right? And that, I think, is where the men's basketball people are going to be like, of course, we understand this. This is Bob Knight, hello, right? Keep going down the list on that one, and you can get to Penn State in football, one thing, right? Joe Paterno and James Franklin, but Cale Sanderson has put together the best wrestling dynasty that I think we've seen, period. Given how competitive NCAA wrestling is and how dominant that program has been since he became head coach there, that's wild to me, man. Like, they're absolutely outstanding at so many different things. One of them happens to be playing football, even if they can't get to a national championship win, since about 1986. Looking more through this, BYU actually has a very large international fan base, which would make sense with the missions that they perform, going to countries all over the world on those missions. Looking at the teams that were bet on the most, with the most money, Georgia, top in the list with 3.7%, Ohio State behind them at 3.6%, USC with 3.3%. And then total bets made, top 10 most bets, percentage of bets, USC at 3.2%. A lot of people like to bet USC football, which makes more sense because USC is a great television property. It's not a great fan base. I'm dunking on it all the time because I don't believe you. I don't believe you. One of the things that USC fans will say is there's more to do in LA than there is to do almost anywhere else. And I would go, that's not a reason, dog. I don't care that the Lakers are playing if USC is my team. I don't care that the Dodgers are playing if USC is my team. By the way, the Dodgers, once again, might be unbeatable. My God. I know torpedo bats and whatnot, but good Lord, man. Look at that team. That team is nasty. It's so nasty. It's illegal. Like, they're going to run rule the Monstars. That's how it should feel right now if you're a Dodgers fan. My God. And then behind Georgia, we got Alabama at 2.3%, Tennessee at 2.3%, Texas at 2.3%, LSU, Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, Miami coming in there. And that makes more sense, too, given where Miami is and just what Miami is up to the last few years. Nevin Shapiro aside, right? In the 1980s, when Jimmy Johnson was head coach, Howard Schnellenberger was head coach, you got to see an influx of, shall we say, the cocaine cowboys coming through saying, hey, we would like to be a part of the college football experience too. I would not be surprised to find out that there was a underground bookie that made quite a lot of money down in Miami when Miami was one of the teams to beat. Fanatics and home field advantage aggregate, like Notre Dame's far and away here, right? Notre Dame is the outlier to many, but Notre Dame gets to operate like its own nation state inside of college football. I'm not sure why we continue to allow this, honestly, except this metric here, this one right here. It is one of the most popular teams in the country, and they globetrot because they, like BYU, have a fanatical following and a large religious following, right? There are people that root for Notre Dame because they are Catholic. There are people that root for BYU because they are Mormon. Just like I'm sure there are people that root for Baylor because they're a Baptist, but one is much larger group than the others, right? Also would lead me to a question that perhaps we don't get to discuss here further, but what if we had a big Muslim Islamic population university that played football? How good would that team be or not be, depending on name, image, and likeness, kind of money you can throw at this, and the number of people that worship in that religion, right? That's one. I also am looking at this from the attendance metrics. Michigan, number one. That makes more sense. That's ridiculous. They were fine with a submit poll at quarterback last year, and they still were able to beat Alabama and Ohio State, right? It's that, right? They had a wet noodle back there, and it didn't matter. They were still pretty competitive, and they're still gaining traction even as all this is going on around them. Like, we're talking about Matt Weiss. We're talking about Connor Stallions. We're talking about sign stealing. We're talking about Jim Harbaugh bolting. We're talking about Jim Harbaugh being suspended for 6 games. We're talking about Sherrone Moore being the first black head coach at Michigan. They continue to just roll right through this. It's actually become a very interesting metric to look at. And as far as what do we care about in the United States, one of the reasons that I love talking about sports and why I decided to do this and write as opposed to law school or whatnot is I always wanted to know what the country thought. And the best way to know what the country thinks is what sports do we value and why do we value them, right? NFL, the most popular sport in America by far. Violent, right? Fierce, competitive. Also, isn't every single night. It's during the fall, and it's once a week for your team, right? We don't play that many games. Social having an impact here, but not a large one. Tennessee has the largest TikTok following with 867,000 people checked into that program, which is not that many given what we know TikTok to be. It's powerful. So what that tells me is kind of like YouTube, we have so much more room for growth here than people think. One of the reasons that I'm bullish on being on YouTube and doing the show digitally is just that, right? We continue to grow. We're pushing toward 132,000 subscribers to this show in April when we don't play football, but we want to talk about football because things like this are being investigated. And then finally, I think the one thing that I wanted to point out here, other than what the top 10 teams are doing, is if you are one of these teams that rank in the top 10 of this particular metric, as unscientific as it may be, you got to be asking your head coach, when are we going to win a national championship? Because A&M is past time. Florida, you need to be back. Oklahoma, my God, you need to be back. For me, if nothing else, you know what I'm saying? Like, do you know how excited I would be to be a national college football analyst and watch my team go win a championship? You know, like that's a rising tide for me. One, I get to talk about my team being good as being trash, just garbage. We sorry. But you also get this opportunity to say, even when we are crap, when we go 6-7 for the second time in 3 years, still one of the 10 most popular teams in the entire country. That's wild to me. Nobody else is edging in here, by the way. Not Colorado with the Deion surge, right? Not Oregon with the Dan Lanning surge. Hello. You got to be about this thing. So I'm about this thing. And I can't wait to see what you think. Let me know what you think in the comments below.